Well, okay. Thanks for everybody for coming along to this day on teaching students to write mathematics. I get to do the first talk. First of all, I'm going to outline what I see as the problem, some of my solutions, and then perhaps a way forward. So let's start off with what I see the problem as. So here's a question that we give to our first year group theory students. Is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is that set under multiplication mod 8 a group? Now if you're not familiar with group theory, maybe haven't done it in a while, then in this case the answer is actually no. But it's actually the student answer that I'm interested in. So the student said that it's not closed and the set contains 0. Okay, so you can see there that there's problems already in that there are no capital letters at the start of the sentence. I mean, they have put in full stops, but does that really make any sense? Not closed, set contains 0. The first thing you might notice is, well, actually, it doesn't tell us whether this is a group. Okay, and we could deduce that they know it's not a group because they've said, oh, it's not closed. They found the one thing that's, or one of the things which tells you that it's not a group, so they've said that. But then they've got this strange set contains 0. Right? And quite clearly, the set does not contain 0. So what I did with this is I told the student about writing in sentences and capital letters, and I put down here, well, quite evidently this is not true. Handed it back to the student. But the reason I bring this up, and I'm sure actually that most of us have got lots of examples like this of students who have written down all sorts of crazy things. But what's interesting about this one is that the student came back to me at the end of the lecture and said that they wanted the marks for this because they considered this to be an okay answer, despite the fact that it says the set contains 0. And obviously it does not contain 0, right? And his answer was, what I get quite a bit, was that, well, you know what I meant. And I'm sure most of you who knows a bit about group theory will know what he meant. What he meant was that if you multiply 2 by 4, you get 8, and the remainder under division by 8 is 0. So if this were closed, then the set would contain 0, but it doesn't. Okay? So the student is doing the right sort of thing in their head. They're actually understanding what's going on. But they've written down what's effectively a load of nonsense. And even when it's pointed out, they will come back and say, well, you know what I meant, and I should get the right answer for it. I did wonder at the time whether I should actually ask them, okay, so next time you write down something that is incredibly, wrong and is most definitely false, should I assume that you meant the opposite? But I didn't actually say that to them because I thought, don't want to put them off too much. But anyway, that's what I see as part of the problem, or an example of part of the problem. So I'll just outline what I'm going to do in this talk. I'll talk about why I think writing math is important, and one of the important things I think is that it forces thinking. It forces the students to actually do some, get some thought into their work. The other thing is that it's a good skill to have. I mean, not just writing mathematics, but just having to write in general, just have to think about communicating in the written word is a good skill to have. So I think that's another good reason for us to do it. And for us, marking is a joy. Well, I suppose that's not strictly true, is it? I mean, but the thing I think is that it's a lot easier to mark a piece of work that's been written well, even when it's wrong. Okay? So obviously marking is never going to be a joy. Okay? But it's a lot easier when you've got a stack of exams or a stack of homeworks to be able to mark something that's nice and easy to read, rather than constantly thinking, okay, this student has sort of got the right idea. They've written down something that's totally incorrect. Do I assume that they really know what's going on? What I'll do now is I'll talk about a couple of what I think of as being sort of like myths, and it'll give you some idea of where I'm coming from in this writing mathematics. So the first myth, I think, and it's a big myth, not just about writing mathematics, but that learning mathematics teaches critical thinking and logical thinking. I've heard this a number of times from people, and they will often, other lecturers will say to me, well, this is what mathematics does, and I think it's something that we tell the potential students and it's something that we tell our paymasters, I guess, that this is what learning maths does for students. It teaches critical thinking and logical thinking. But it seems to me that just exposure to learning mathematics doesn't necessarily teach that. I think there's got to be some sort of a little extra something that we have to do in order to ensure that they do start thinking critically and thinking logically. Another myth is, I've heard this a number of times, is, well, why don't we just tell students to write their work so that someone else can understand it, right? And that should be the end of the problem. Now I've heard this mentioned a number of times, and I was at, I think it was the BMC in York, and we were having a sort of meeting there about education, and somebody was very perplexed about why we were discussing about getting students to write mathematics correctly, because surely all we have to do is tell students to write their work so that someone else can understand it. Now I think we do have to tell them that they have to write the work so that someone else can understand it, but I don't think that's enough. So yeah, so we do have to tell them this, because I think for lots of aspects of learning, students know what they have to do, right? They know that they have to get up in the morning and go to lectures. They know that they have to do the homework and hand it in, and they know they have to read it and so on and so forth. But they end up not doing those things, because of human nature, I guess. I mean, this doesn't apply just to students, I suppose. It applies to anyone who's ever had a gym membership and not gone along to the gym. You know exercise is good for you, that sort of thing. But I think when it comes to writing, I think we do have to tell the students that they should write well, because I don't think that they know that they have to do it. So I think it's important that we do tell them, but I don't think it's sufficient. Okay, so if only it were that simple. Okay, so what do I do in my approach? Well, I did actually write a book about this, How to Think Like a Mathematician. So this is for first-year undergraduates. In it, I wanted to teach thinking, things like logic and so on and so forth. I'm not really don't really have time to talk about it today. And also, I decided I would have something which was teaching writing. It was going to be 2 or 3 chapters. When I originally envisaged the book, I was thinking it was going to be 2 or 3 chapters. In the end, there were 2 chapters on teaching writing, because I felt that there wasn't much around. As far as I can tell, not many people have looked into this, and there's not been much research on teaching writing or student writing. There's been a bit. I mean, it's not like this never happened before, but there's not much. I think there's a few years ago when I went to some education conference where we were deciding about various projects, it struck me as interesting that there was about a dozen people talking about the projects they're about to do. And I think only one of them was about helping students who were in some way at the top of the class. Almost everything else was all about, let's do remedial work. Yes, let's get students to do this, that and the other because they don't learn it at school. So I think things have changed somewhat. I think there's less emphasis on the remedial, and we're moving, certainly there's a lot more interest in other things. And I think this is one of the things we should be interested in, is teaching writing. So a couple of slogans, just to tell you where I'm coming from. To write clearly, students need to think clearly. Right, it seems fairly evident. And to think clearly, students need to write clearly. I think the two go together quite well. Yeah, if the students are forced to write clearly, then they actually have to think through their answers and write it down correctly. And just doing that, I think, just helps. Why should we do this sort of thing? Well, I think sometimes we lose sight of the purpose of a university education. Why are we doing all this? There's a lot of emphasis on jobs, but I think we should be preparing students for life. And I think there's lots of times when they're going to need writing skills, and I think we can teach maths students to by teaching them to write mathematics, we'll be also teaching them to write correctly anyway. So I think this does prepare them for life. This goes for other presentational skills. So for example, giving oral presentations. We often tell students, well, you're going to be doing this in your job, but I also like to tell students, well, actually at some point you might be doing a best man speech at a wedding. these days, brides and bridesmaids also get a chance to give a speech. This does work for them. It does work for women as well. But also, I mean, I sometimes tell students that sometimes they're going to be in front of the PTA, the Parents Teachers Association, and I try and tell them, well, obviously that's years away for you, but the time when it does come, that when you have to present to some sort of situation like that, then you look back and thank us. So as I'm saying, writing well is an extremely useful skill. It can be used in lots of different areas. The one we try and get the students the one we use to try and motivate students is to say, well, you'll use it in your job. And another reason I think why we should do this is that students choose mathematics as they don't like writing essays. That's commonly what I get from students. I didn't want to do essays, so therefore I chose maths. So a lot of students need this help anyway. Right? If they were doing history or something, they'd get a lot of help with feedback on their essays, but our students generally don't. So what this means is this is kind of like a low-hanging fruit. A small effort on our part can give a major boost to the student, right? Because the students generally, they're not particularly good at writing. They don't like doing the essays or whatever. So we give them a little bit, it can actually make a big difference. So I think this is a low-hanging fruit, as they say in business. What do we actually do here at Leeds? What we do is give a how to write mathematics booklet, and unfortunately I don't have any left. We've given them all away. I was looking for a copy and I don't have one to wave at you and say this is what we give to them. But we're giving them booklets, which is basically the chapters 3 and 4 of my book. And if you want copies of these, you can get them on my personal website, or you can go to the School of Maths website. Even though they're in the book, the publishers are quite happy for them to be given away free. I think they understand the ideas behind Web 2.0. So it is freely available. And we give this to the students in the first week, and I talk to them for about half an hour. So what's in this booklet? What are they told? Well, the first thing I think I try and tell students, and I think is the most important, is that they should write in sentences. That example we saw right at the start, it wasn't really in sentences, and it was hard to understand. So I tell students, well, this is the first thing, takes precedence over all others, and it can really change the way you present your work. I tell them to use punctuation. I think this is very important. In that example we saw, didn't have capital letters at the starts of the sentences. So capital letters, full stops. I also tell them to use grammar correctly. This one's a tricky one for me, because I know if I set myself up as a grammar expert, there's always be somebody there ready to trip me up and point out my errors. But anyway, I can live with that. So I tell them to use grammar correctly. There's a common error here that they think that maths, it's highly symbolic, so all we need to do is provide a load of symbols doing maths. Okay? And what I try and do is get them away from that idea and say, well, you've got to write in sentences, you've got to explain things. There are many other points in this booklet, and I don't have time to go through them all during the meeting that I have with the students, or I certainly don't have time to go through them all in this meeting here. But one thing I like to say to the students is, readers are not psychic. You have to explain what you're doing. They have to tell me things, not just writing down a load of symbols. Okay, they need to explain their assertions, for example. Their use of symbols has got to be okay. There's a little bit about expressing yourself clearly. And I can't resist mentioning this one, which I call the cursive implication symbol. Lots of us have our pet hates. I think I was at a meeting recently with Adrian Simpson was there, and he was saying how he hated the students using those 3 dots. 3 dots for therefore. And that's his personal bugbear. But I'll kind of accept that one. I prefer if they were to write out the word therefore. But at least it shows that there's some sort of, they're trying to give some sort of explanation by putting down therefore. Whereas I think the implication symbol, which I know why they do it. It does get overused. And they use it because it makes a proof look very, very mathematical. But they just kind of put it in all the time. So that's one of my pet hates. So if you actually look at this one's been nicely typed up. So it says, find in the form, this is the exercise, find in the form y equals mx plus c the invariant lines of the transformation with matrix 0, 1, 1, 0. So basically, you've got a line in the plane, and then there's a transformation applied to it. You want the lines which don't change. So that one's easy because it's just swapping around the x and the y coordinates. So we look at this example, you can see there's lots of this use of the implication sign. And now obviously this equation here, you can see then it becomes this equation here, doesn't it? Well, that's what I thought when I first read it, but no, it doesn't. This is actually, they're just multiplying these two things together, and that's what you get, of course. If you do that, you can see, oh yes, that's what it is. And then on the next line, it doesn't follow from that. It actually follows from something else. What they've done is they've taken these two things and put them in up there, which would have been nice to tell us. I mean, there's plenty good about this. I mean, look, you can see that it is written with some explanatory text. But then we go down here, this equation then becomes like this. That's just rearrangement. And then suddenly for all x appears. Was it for all x up here? I think this should perhaps go at the start, yes? Yeah, okay. And then a bit down here, well, from this, putting in x equals 0, you get m equals -1 or c equals 0. And then on the next line, it's then 1 minus m squared times x equals 0 for all x, which I guess it must be they're using this, right? But they've not said so. Okay? But anyway, you get the idea. It's kind of like, let's put in lots of implication symbols, and there's some bits which are missing, yeah? But actually, normally when I do these things, I keep the student's name, I keep it anonymous, okay? But in this case, I'll make an exception, because this is actually from a textbook from AQA, the examinations board. So this kind of explains why students don't write things down very clearly. If you look through the book, it's not bad, the answers in this book, the work solutions, but there are quite a number of things where I think, well, you can actually do better, and we need to teach the students to do these things better. So, to return to the booklet, in the booklet there's a worked example where I've done just taken a student's example. I mean, this really is a student example, which to protect their identity I wrote out again, but this is precisely what they wrote in an answer to showing that the cosine rule held for an obtuse angle. In the lectures they were given it for an acute angle, and they had to show it for an obtuse angle. But this is the sort of thing we get. I mean, this is quite familiar to anybody who's got students. I mean, there's no real explanation of where these things come from. Where does this come from? A squared equals that. Well, we can work out it's from Pythagoras' theorem. Okay, so why didn't they tell me? And then, trying to read from left to right, it's difficult, isn't it? They've obviously got this bit here, and then it's all coming together, and then there's these strange arrows pointing out lots of different things, so oh, this bit goes in here, that goes in there. Abbreviations, sub into. Students like subbing, don't they? I often see that subbing into. But anyhow, so that's what the students get, and during my tutorial lessons, during my first tutorial, I would often go through this example with the students and ask them what's wrong with it, and so on and so forth. In the booklet, they can work by themselves. They can look through, find the errors, see how to produce a better solution. And actually, these are available. Well, me going through the solution is available on YouTube. So how do I actually apply this? Well, to give you some background, School of Maths at University of Leeds has an intake of about 148 home EU students and about 20 international. I think that's roughly right for this year. I mean, in the past it was something like 168. The current offer is AAB, with an A has to be in maths. I think half of further maths, A or AS level. So you can see these are good students, right? Okay. What used to happen is that we'd be given, a lecturer would be given 6 tutees, and they'd have weekly meetings where exercises would be set in lectures, and then the tutor would go through those exercises, the problems that the students have with them. The students would then write up their answers, hand them in to me, I'd mark them, and they'd get them back. When you're marking, should you show any tolerance of errors? That's an important question I think we all have to ask. Because right at the start, there are errors all over the place. So, you know, it can be dispiriting for students to see their work just, you know, they're used to being good, you know, getting a good pat on the head every time they hand in their homework, and now they're getting all these, this bit's wrong, that bit's wrong. So, do we tolerate errors? I took the point of view that I shouldn't, so I try and correct everything. There were exceptions to that. Generally, if I thought, well, the student has obviously misunderstood to a great deal, and the point I'm about to make was fairly subtle, I'd kind of leave that out. I wouldn't put it in. And I did give plenty of feedback to the students, and this can be a bit of a problem if you have lots of scripts. With 6 tutees, it's not too difficult. One thing I did do was use the How to Write Like a Mathematician booklets that we give them. I could use the page number and point them to the correct place there. So if they weren't using equals correctly, you know, and they had a vector and a number being equal, I'd basically say, you know, equals means equals, and give them the page number. So I made the job of feedback easier. I might have given them too much feedback. There's plenty to read. I think we all know that lots of students, when they get the work back, they'll look at the end and see what the mark is, and then that's enough. They go, all right, done that, good. Plenty of students do that, but I think a lot of them do actually read it. I think some don't. Certainly I've got an example of, or I've got an anecdote of a case where the student didn't read it. The student kept making, I think it was probably something to do with the implication sign, and did it every week. So I said, wrote on the thing, I said, if you do this again, I will stamp on your work. Right? So sure enough, next week, it happened again. So when I was handing the work back, I was about to pass it to him, and as he reached out to take it, I just dropped it and then just started stamping on it. And he looked at me and said, what are you doing? What's going on? So I asked him, you know, you haven't been reading my comments, have you? And of course, you know, he had to admit that, well, no, he didn't. Because if he had done, he would have known not to keep making this mistake, and he would have realized that the reason I was stamping on his work was because he'd done it again. So yeah, there's plenty of cases where students don't read it, but the good ones certainly do. And that they adjust things accordingly. Now there is some student resistance to the, there's no tolerance, certainly, and you've got to try and overcome the resistance. You know, they do say things like, you know what I meant, and I didn't come here to write essays. And they do become a little bit dispirited, I think, sometimes, which is a bit of a problem, and it's something that's, you know, if you're going to teach them writing, they are going to have something else to worry about. This is another reason for the resistance. They, you know, they have some extra work to do. Before they could just try and understand what they're doing, slap down some ideas. Now they have to get those ideas right. So, you know, it can be dispiriting having to do this extra work, you know, just to satisfy Dr. Houston's ideas. But anyway, that's what used to happen in the past. We used to have 6 tutees, but now we've changed to groups of 12 in order to give more help to our second year and third year students. So now we have bigger groups, and it's harder because I see the students every 2 weeks generally, so I don't really get to know what problems they have. Before I could be reading something and go, oh yes, that person made the same mistake last week, but it's a bit harder with a group of 12 and every 2 weeks. So what conclusions can I draw from this? Or what do the students think? They hate it. I think that's fair, safe to say. You know, when they get the first bit of work back and it's red all over, doesn't look good. But they hate it at first. Okay? And they're grateful at the end. Generally, at the end of the year, I would ask them about, you know, me constantly picking on their writing, and they did sort of at the end say, oh yeah, sure, we understand, yeah, we know why we're doing it now, and so they were kind of grateful. And then there was some effect. I mean, I could tell once when I was marking an exam for I think it was second year or third year, and I thought this stuff's quite well written. It's wrong, but it's well written, right? So at the end, when you know, because it's anonymously marked, at the end I checked to see what it was, and it was one of my tutees. So it, you know, it did sink into some effect to some extent. But of course, these anecdotes, they're not very scientific. And one thing I would like to do is to do a bit more scientific and see whether these methods really do work. So maybe that's something we can discuss later on today. I should say that colleagues are broadly in favour. They'll kind of agree that the students should write better, but they can be undermining in that they won't give students so much feedback, and so it'll be a case of tick or cross or that kind of thing. Cross, see solutions, that sort of thing. And there is a certain resistance to skills. And once the word skills is used, people get a bit upset. So I think it's a good idea not to mention the word skills. Where should we go? This, as I said, low-hanging fruits. We can make a big difference here. I think there's not much been done in practice, and today we're going to see some examples of the practice. And there's not much done in research on writing mathematics. If you want to get involved in this sort of things, you can start by looking at chapters 3 and 4 on my website. You can use them quite freely. I've had people getting in touch with me and saying, can we give it to our students? And I always say, yes, yes. So I think at Reading, once they put the chapters onto, put the booklets onto a little pen drive that they would give to their students. And various people have written, can we put it on CDs and things like that? So I always say yes. So if you want to use it, then do. And from this meeting, if you've got any examples you want to contribute, because I've said we're going to make a DVD, and we could perhaps put some other examples on that DVD if you want to take part. One thing I was thinking of doing is making the LaTeX of my exercises available so that anybody could incorporate them into their own exercises, and then it would save them having to create things from scratch. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Do you have any questions or comments?
So how many years has this thing been going on?
Well, pretty much since I came here, which is 10 or 11 years ago. I've been incrementally doing things. So I don't know how long we've been giving students a booklet, maybe from 2001. So I think then in 2007 the booklet, well, from about 2001 the booklet was basically the slimmed down version of my book, and then about 2007, 2008 we started giving them the two chapters. So yeah, I mean it has been going on a while, and I could probably see if we could say get some of my tutees from a number of years ago and then see what their writing is like and perhaps compare it to a control group maybe.
Are your tutees the only ones who are getting this kind of level of feedback on how they write?
Well, some people do tell me that they have done one or two things, but I don't think they go at it in quite the same sort of level of fervour that I do. So that yeah, it's certainly there will be a wide variation within any maths department about how people, because everybody has their own pet hates and pet loves and things like that. So this is one of mine. This is my pet interest.
So this giving feedback is not linked to any particular maths module that you are running, or are you giving feedback to all the modules that you are teaching?
Well, to the modules I'm teaching that I mark, yes, I will do that. But it's mainly in the first year that I do marking. Yeah, in the later years we often have student markers. So I can't give them feedback. But in the second and third year I do other things which I don't really have time to talk about today. Maybe I'll put it on the DVD as an extra, talk about that.
How much of this writing they need to know before they come to university? Like writing mathematics, they should know when they study mathematics when they are 13, 14 maybe?
Well, yes, but it's not really done. I mean, school teachers, they really are trying to get the students through the exam. They're not particularly, it's not their fault, but they're not particularly interested in getting the students to do this, because they have to get the students up to, say, a C grade at GCSE, and they have to get the students from an A level into a university. So it's not one of their priorities.
I think I encourage the same point, because do we prepare students well when we do teach them at the primary schools and the high schools to become the university well prepared to write mathematics at the right way. I think that's, I have been teaching for a long time for primary schools and high schools, and this problem comes from the syllabus at these schools because we don't prepare students well to write mathematics in the right way when they become to the university. So when the students come to the university, we ask them to write mathematics at the right way. That's the hard thing for them.
Yeah.
So how can we treat this point at the standard stage at the primary schools as well?
Well, how can we do it? I don't think we can. I really don't think that I can go into schools or I can affect the curriculum in a major way. I think I can only just take the students that I've got and then move them on from that. I mean, that's all I can do. I mean, it would be great if, you know, if the the Minister for Education would listen to me, but I mean, he's not going to, is he? So,
Do we complain enough? Maybe that's the problem.
Well, if we do complain more, then we just become known as a bunch of whiners. Yeah, we're always complaining about something. I mean, yes, I mean, it would be great if we could actually take this fight and change things in the...
Well, if I could put some of the stuff the must right on the front page of a national newspaper, I mean, that would be very fun. I can assure you.
But can you do that? I mean, national newspapers aren't going to...
I'm saying that this problem cannot be solved by universities alone.
No, I mean, it's no.
It's a huge
I don't think I can solve it, so I'm not trying to. Yeah. Well, I think it was... Do you want to say first?
Sorry, it's a bit of a different tangent. I was just wondering whether you think some students might see this as an extra hoop to jump through, rather than necessarily this is a better way of communicating my thinking, rather than, oh, this lecturer just wants me to write the implied symbol in this way and I'll just do what he says because I'll get more marks.
Yes, they do view it as a hoop to go through, an extra hoop to go through. But as I keep telling them during the semester, you know, there is a reason for this. You know, they will get an improvement, and at the end they kind of agree grudgingly, I suppose. But you know, they can see there is benefit at the end. Obviously, at the time they don't want to do it because it's extra work. Anyway, I'm conscious of the time here, so maybe one last question.
I mean, when you're marking lots of first-year work, you see things which are essentially kind of model solutions from the A-level syllabus, don't you, in that kind of bits of answer way. I was wondering if you had any ideas about whether maybe using more peer marking in the first year, just so that everyone becomes exposed to everyone else's bad habits and actually thinks about, I'm not actually communicating the solution to my professor, I'm communicating it, I've got to communicate it to a peer, whether that would be more effective in terms of getting them to think about how they write their solution.
Yeah, I mean...
So they'll be embarrassed about a friend sitting there, well, if they won't be embarrassed about me sitting here.
Yeah, that is true. Well, we are changing our first year, the way we teach our first year, so we could incorporate those sorts of ideas. The way I've done it for the second year and third year courses is to give the students copies of solutions in exams, and you know that students have done. It's a nice, quick, easy way of giving the students something to do. You just photocopy bad answers, give it to the students, and say, "Tell me what's wrong with that." Yeah, and you can do that in a lecture. Takes half an hour or something, and then they can see what's a bad example. They can sort of think, "Oh yeah, I do that. I better not do it anymore." So it's a similar sort of thing, but there's not that kind of swapping as you're suggesting. Okay. Right. Okay. I think we should swap over to the next talk.